One order, one refusal. And suddenly, a flight full of passengers found themselves trapped in a scandal that made headlines before they even landed. She thought her uniform gave her power, but when she disrespected the wrong woman, everything changed. If you believe respect should never depend on skin color, then hit that like, subscribe, and stay till the end. This one will give you chills. It was a bright Monday morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta. Business travelers filled the terminal, rushing to catch early flights. But among them walked one woman who didn't rush at all. She moved with purpose, confidence, and quiet power. Her name was Danielle Carter. 38 years old. CEO of Carter Tech Innovations, one of Atlanta's fastest-growing tech firms. She had built her company from scratch. No investors, no handouts, just sleepless nights and relentless grit. Today, she was headed to Los Angeles for one of the biggest partnership meetings of her career. The deal could change everything for her company and for the young black women she mentored across America who dreamed of breaking into tech. Flight 286 to Los Angeles now boarding at Gate C12. Danielle adjusted her blazer, smiled politely at the attendant scanning tickets, and stepped onto the jet bridge. The hum of engines, the recycled air, the quiet murmur of passengers settling in, it was all familiar to her. She'd flown hundreds of times. But this flight would be one she would never forget. She found her seat, 3A, business class window. Beside her sat an elderly gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes. "Good morning," she greeted. "Looks like it's a full flight today." He smiled. "It always is. Headed to LA for work." She nodded, trying to make sure my company doesn't crash before the plane does. They both laughed softly. Then came the flight attendant, a woman in her mid-30s, blonde hair tightly coiled into a bun. Name tag shining, Melissa Thompson. Her smile, polite, professional, but the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She greeted each row, chatting with the passengers across the aisle, bending down to ask if they needed water or snacks. But when she reached Danielle's row, her tone shifted slightly, stiff, detached. "Seatbelt on, ma'am?" she asked, glancing briefly, not waiting for an answer. "Yes," Danielle said, but Melissa had already turned away. It was small, barely noticeable, but Danielle felt it. That subtle chill. That moment of being invisible, the kind she had learned to recognize too well. The man beside her leaned closer. "Some people forget manners at 30,000 feet, he whispered. Danielle smiled faintly. "I've seen worse," she replied. As the plane began to taxi, Melissa was all smiles again, but not for her. She leaned warmly toward a young white businessman across the aisle. "Mr. Peterson, can I get you a drink before takeoff?" He grinned. "I'll take a whiskey, neat." She laughed softly. "Coming right up." Danielle turned toward the window, taking a deep breath. She'd promised herself not to let microaggressions ruin her peace anymore. She had work to do, people to represent, and bigger battles to fight than someone's bad attitude. 30 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign went off. The cabin lights brightened, and passengers began relaxing. Some scrolled through phones, others read magazines. Melissa pushed the service cart slowly down the aisle, her tone cheerful again. "Would you like a drink, sir?" she asked a man 2 seats behind. "Yes, please." "Sparkling water." "Of course," she said warmly. When she reached Danielle's row, Danielle smiled politely. "Hi, could I please have a bottle of sparkling water as well?" Melissa's tone turned neutral. "I think we're out of that. Maybe you'd prefer regular water?" Danielle paused. "Oh, that's fine then, thank you." Melissa poured it quickly, avoiding eye contact. She moved on, her friendly tone returning instantly when she reached the next passenger, the young businessman again. "And for you, Mr. Peterson?" He smiled. "Actually, make that sparkling water with ice this time." Melissa nodded. "You got it." Danielle froze. "Wait, sparkling water?" Her eyes followed the bottle, the same one she'd just been told didn't exist, being poured carefully into a crystal glass and placed in front of him with a smile. Her jaw tightened slightly. She didn't want to cause a scene, but the elderly man beside her noticed. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Danielle nodded slowly. I'm fine. But her voice betrayed her. A few minutes later, she pressed the call button gently. The soft chime caught Melissa's attention. She turned, eyes narrowing slightly, and walked over. Yes. Danielle's tone was calm, respectful. I just wanted to clarify something. You mentioned there was no sparkling water left, but I noticed you served one just after me. Melissa's expression stiffened. I don't think that's what happened, ma'am. You must have misheard. Danielle's voice stayed even. No, I saw it. I just wanted to know if there was a reason I couldn't have the same. The air between them grew still. Melissa forced a smile, the kind that hides irritation. Ma'am, please don't make this an issue. I'm not making it an issue, Danielle replied quietly. I'm asking for equal service. Passengers began glancing over. The hum of conversation died down. Melissa's cheeks flushed red. I'll get my supervisor, she said abruptly, turning away. Danielle exhaled slowly. She didn't want confrontation. But she also refused to be disrespected. The elderly man beside her murmured softly, You handled that with grace. She smiled weakly. Grace is all we've ever been allowed to have. From a few rows back, a woman whispered to her friend, Did she just refuse her water? That's crazy. Within moments, a senior crew member, the flight supervisor, approached. Good afternoon, is there a problem here? He asked, voice rehearsed. Melissa jumped in first. This passenger is being confrontational about drink choices. Danielle turned slowly to face him. I simply asked for what the gentleman across the aisle received. He hesitated, looking between them, clearly uncomfortable. Let's all just calm down. Danielle's tone stayed calm. I am calm. I just don't like being lied to. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Phones quietly lifted. Someone started recording. The young businessman, the one with the sparkling water, looked away awkwardly. The supervisor nodded. Let's take this conversation to the galley, ma'am. No, Danielle replied softly. If I'm being disrespected in public, we can discuss it in public. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the engines humming beneath it. Melissa crossed her arms, defensive now. Are you accusing me of being racist? Danielle didn't blink. I'm saying your actions speak for themselves. And just like that, the energy on that plane shifted. Every passenger knew this wasn't just about water anymore. Something far deeper had just taken off. But what Melissa didn't know was that the woman she just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. And in less than 30 minutes, the captain would receive a message that would turn this entire flight upside down. What Melissa didn't know was that the woman she just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. And in less than 30 minutes, the captain would receive a message that would turn this entire flight upside down. Danielle Carter sat silently in her seat, her eyes steady, her posture calm but unreadable. To everyone else, it looked like she dropped the issue. But inside her, something had shifted. This wasn't about a drink anymore. It was about dignity. Across the aisle, the young businessman, Peterson, kept his gaze glued to his tablet, pretending not to notice. But guilt flickered across his face. A few passengers whispered quietly, some defending Danielle, others just watching like it was a movie. The flight supervisor, still standing near the galley, whispered something to Melissa, a low exchange that Danielle couldn't fully hear. But she caught enough to know what it meant. Just keep her calm until we land. She turned to the elderly man beside her. You see how easy it is? She said quietly. He nodded sadly. Every day, someone thinks they can decide who deserves respect. 10 minutes passed. The plane cruised smoothly over the clouds, but tension hung thick in the air. Then, a soft chime. The captain's message alert light blinked in the galley. Melissa noticed it. The supervisor walked over, picked up the phone, and froze mid-sentence as he read the message displayed on his tablet. His eyes darted toward Danielle, then back to the cockpit. He said something under his breath, and his face went pale. He hurried toward the front of the cabin. Melissa frowned. What's going on? He didn't answer. A moment later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, but slightly uneasy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor operational issue. We'll be adjusting our route for a moment. Nothing to worry about. But Danielle knew better. She'd sent a single encrypted message before the Wi-Fi cut out. Not to threaten, not to embarrass, but to inform. She was an investor. Not in the airline itself, but in its corporate partner, a firm that funded half the airline's international expansion program. And on her contact list was a name that carried real weight: Thomas Brannigan, Vice President of Corporate Operations. She hadn't demanded anything. She'd simply sent the truth: racially biased incident in progress aboard Flight 286. I'll wait to see how your team responds. Now, the system was already in motion. Melissa returned to her service cart, pretending everything was normal, but her hands trembled. She leaned toward her colleague. "I think she's trying to pull something," she whispered. Her colleague frowned. "You mean the lady in 3A? Yes. She's making a scene for no reason." The colleague shook his head. "You embarrassed her, Mo. People saw." Melissa's jaw tightened. "You're taking her side now?" "No, I'm saying the cabin's watching. Maybe just back off." But backing off wasn't something Melissa knew how to do. Not when she felt her authority slipping. She stormed up to Danielle's row, voice lowered but sharp. "Ma'am, I'm asking you politely not to create unnecessary tension with the crew." Danielle turned her gaze upward, unflinching. "I asked for fairness. You created the tension." Melissa's voice rose slightly, enough for others to hear. "Look, we treat all passengers equally here. If you're trying to accuse me of something, say it clearly." Danielle's tone stayed steady, cold as steel. "Okay then. You disrespected me. You lied. And you think your uniform makes that acceptable." The businessman across the aisle muttered under his breath, "She's got a point." Melissa's cheeks flushed red. "I'm not dealing with this attitude." "Sir." She turned to the supervisor. "I want her moved." The supervisor froze, visibly sweating now. "We're not moving anyone, Melissa." Passengers began murmuring louder now. A woman in row 4 spoke up. "She didn't do anything wrong. We saw what happened." Melissa shot her a glare. "Ma'am, please stay out of this." But the tide had turned. The quiet whispers grew into a low rumble of disapproval. Then, the cabin lights flickered. The captain's voice came through again, but this time, more serious. "Cabin crew, please return to your stations. We've been instructed to return to the gate for a brief operational review." A wave of confusion spread through the passengers. "What's going on? Why are we turning around?" Melissa blinked in disbelief. "Wait, we're returning? Why?" she asked the supervisor. He didn't answer. His radio buzzed quietly. "Ground request. Passenger verification, seat 3A." Melissa's face went pale. "Seat 3A," she whispered. That was Danielle. The supervisor's voice cracked slightly. "They said corporate just called. They want full details on the incident before the flight continues." The flight attendant's lips parted, but no words came out. Danielle sat back, silent. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply placed her hands together and stared straight ahead. 5 minutes later, the plane began its slow descent back toward Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Passengers started talking openly now. She really called them out. Good for her. This airline's in trouble. Melissa could barely breathe. Her pulse raced. She leaned against the galley wall, trying to steady herself. "This can't be happening," she whispered. The supervisor glanced over. "It's already happening." As the wheels touched the runway, the cabin filled with the sound of murmuring and hushed conversations. The captain's voice came through once more. "Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. Please remain seated until further notice." Melissa's eyes darted toward Danielle again, resentment, fear, and confusion swirling together. She whispered harshly, "You don't know who you're messing with." Danielle turned her head slowly. "Neither do you." Ground crew stood waiting as the plane stopped short of the terminal. 2 airline managers boarded with tablets in hand. The tension could have been cut with a knife. The manager's tone was firm. "Ms. Carter?" Danielle looked up calmly. "Yes. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Could we speak privately?" Danielle glanced at Melissa, then back to him. No. Whatever needs to be said, say it here. The passengers turned silent. All eyes on them. Melissa started to speak. Sir, she's exaggerating. The manager raised a hand. Ms. Thompson, you are to step aside immediately. Her jaw dropped. What? You've been temporarily relieved of duty pending investigation. Gasps filled the cabin. Danielle remained silent, eyes steady. Melissa stammered, This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. The manager interrupted sharply, Enough. Danielle's voice finally broke the silence. Respect isn't optional. You chose the wrong passenger to test that on. The manager nodded. Ms. Carter will handle this appropriately. Danielle stood up slowly, adjusted her jacket and said quietly, Good, because if you don't, I will. But no one, not even Danielle, expected what would happen once they stepped off that plane. Because what began as one act of disrespect was about to become a national story. The plane sat motionless on the tarmac. The seatbelt signs still glowed red, but nobody cared anymore. Every passenger's attention was fixed on one woman, Danielle Carter, and one crew member who now stood frozen, Melissa Thompson. The silence was deafening. Passengers didn't move. No one knew what was about to happen, but everyone knew it would be something they'd never forget. The door to the cockpit opened. The captain, a tall man with graying hair, stepped out. His face was tense. He looked at the manager, then at Danielle, then finally at Melissa. Ladies and gentlemen, he began carefully, we've been instructed to remain grounded while corporate resolves a service complaint that occurred during this flight. Murmurs filled the cabin. A man in row 6 whispered, Service complaint? That's putting it lightly. Melissa's voice cracked as she turned to the captain. Sir, I was just doing my job. The captain's tone was calm but cold. I'm not here to argue. You've been asked to cooperate while ground management handles this. 2 corporate representatives from the airline entered the cabin. A woman in a navy blue suit led the way, badge reading, Regional Director, Customer Relations. She didn't waste time. Good afternoon, she said to the passengers, her voice firm yet professional. We apologize for the delay. There's been a complaint regarding staff behavior, and we need to address it immediately. Her gaze shifted toward Danielle. Ms. Carter, I'm aware of your message. Would you like to speak privately or? Danielle stood slowly, unbothered. No. This happened publicly. We can discuss it publicly. The woman nodded, understanding the gravity of what was unfolding. Understood. Then she turned toward Melissa. Ms. Thompson, I need you to explain your interaction with Ms. Carter. Melissa swallowed hard. She asked for sparkling water. I told her we were out. I later found another bottle and served it to someone else. I didn't mean. Danielle interrupted softly, You didn't mean for me to see. Melissa's voice rose, defensive now. That's not what I said. No, Danielle replied calmly, but that's what you did. The regional director turned to the supervisor. Did you witness this? He hesitated. I saw part of it. She did say there was no sparkling water. And later served one to another passenger? He nodded reluctantly. Yes. Gasps rippled through the cabin. One passenger whispered, Finally, some honesty. The director sighed. All right, Ms. Thompson, I need to remind you that company policy prohibits differential treatment of passengers, especially when there's any indication it could be biased or discriminatory. Melissa's eyes widened. You think I'm racist? No one said that, the director replied calmly. But perception matters. And the perception here is damaging. Danielle crossed her arms. Her voice was quiet but sharp. When you look at me, you see attitude. When you look at him, she pointed subtly toward the businessman, you see respect. That's what bias looks like. You don't have to say it out loud for it to scream through your actions. The businessman shifted awkwardly. She's right, he muttered. I shouldn't have taken that drink. I knew what it looked like. Melissa's composure cracked. I was just following orders. The supervisor cut her off. There were no such orders. The director turned to the captain. Captain, Corporates instructing us to deplane passengers temporarily while we investigate. Please begin disembarking procedure. The passengers stood up one by one. Many gave Danielle a small nod or whispered, "We saw everything." A woman from row 5 said softly, "Thank you for standing up." Danielle only nodded in return, her face calm but her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from years of holding things in. Melissa stood near the galley, pale and furious. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone." Danielle met her eyes. "No. You did that yourself." As passengers began exiting, the director gestured toward the front. "Miss Carter, please step out with us. We'll continue the discussion at the terminal." Danielle moved slowly down the aisle, feeling dozens of eyes follow her. Some in admiration, others in disbelief. When she reached the exit, she turned one last time toward Melissa. "You had a chance to do the right thing when no one was watching," she said. "But now, everyone's watching." Melissa's lips trembled, her words barely a whisper. "You don't understand what it's like working here." Danielle paused. "Maybe not. But I understand what it's like being judged before you even speak." The group stepped into the jet bridge, greeted by a wall of reporters and security. Someone had leaked the story already. Cameras flashed. Voices shouted questions. Is it true the plane was grounded because of discrimination? "Ma'am, did you really call corporate mid-flight?" The director raised a hand. "No comments until investigation concludes." Danielle stayed quiet, moving through the chaos with measured calm. Inside the terminal conference room, the airline's senior operations officer joined via video call. His voice echoed through the speakers. "Ms. Carter, on behalf of the airline, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced. This does not reflect our values." Danielle's gaze didn't shift. "Apologies are easy. Accountability isn't." He hesitated. "We'll conduct a full review." She replied sharply, "Make sure it's not just a review. Make it a change." Melissa entered, escorted by security. Tears streaked her face, though her tone remained defiant. "I said I was sorry," she snapped, voice trembling. Danielle turned toward her slowly. "No, you said you were misunderstood." Melissa stepped forward. "You ruined my career for nothing." Danielle's voice dropped low. "You ruined your career the moment you decided who deserved respect." The director intervened quickly. "That's enough, both of you." But the air was thick, too heavy to breathe. Every word, every glare, every heartbeat carried years of buried frustration and denial. Danielle rose from her chair. Her tone was calm but final. "You think this is just about me? It's not. It's about every person who's ever been told they were too sensitive when what they were really being was invisible." The room fell silent. Even the officers at the back lowered their eyes. Then a sharp knock on the door. Another airline executive entered, holding a tablet. "Ma'am," he said softly to the director, "you'll want to see this." He turned the screen around. The story was already live. Black CEO grounds flight after racist refusal, trending across social media. Videos from passengers had gone viral. Melissa gasped. "They filmed this." The director closed her eyes. "It's everywhere." Danielle looked at her calmly. "Then maybe now, someone will finally listen." The executive turned toward her, voice low. "Ms. Carter, we need to release a statement immediately. This situation's escalating fast." She nodded. "Do what you need to do. But understand this, I'm not interested in money or headlines. I'm interested in change." Melissa whispered bitterly, "You think the world's gonna change because of you?" Danielle turned, eyes sharp but steady. "No. It's going to change because people like you keep proving why it has to." The director stood up. "We'll continue this in private. Security, escort Ms. Thompson to the operations office." Melissa froze. "Wait, you're suspending me?" The director didn't answer. The look said enough. As she was led out, Melissa turned one last time toward Danielle. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Danielle didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "I already regret having to teach this lesson." But Danielle didn't know that the story was already spreading beyond that terminal, and by morning, the entire country would know her name and hers. By the time Danielle reached her hotel room, the world already knew. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Hundreds of messages, from journalists, colleagues, even strangers, all saying the same thing. We saw what happened. We stand with you. She didn't want fame. She wanted fairness. But in a world obsessed with headlines, the truth rarely travels quietly. Across town, in a small apartment in Phoenix, Melissa Thompson sat on the floor, staring at her phone screen. The video, that 6-minute clip, had been viewed over 3 million times. Her face, her voice, her words, frozen forever in the frame of racism and arrogance. The comments were brutal. Fire her. She thought her uniform made her better. This is what happens when power goes unchecked. Melissa threw the phone aside and buried her face in her hands. How did it get this far? She whispered. But deep down, she already knew. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters in Atlanta, chaos reigned. Executives crowded a conference table, screens flashing with social media feeds and live news coverage. One manager slammed his palm against the table. This is spiraling out of control. We can't afford a discrimination scandal right now. The vice president of corporate affairs, a composed woman named Linda Reyes, spoke firmly. Damage control isn't enough. We need accountability and transparency. The video clearly shows misconduct. Another executive frowned. You mean we fire her? Linda's eyes hardened. We investigate first. Then we act. An assistant entered, clutching a tablet. Ma'am, Ms. Carter has just released a statement. Everyone turned to look. On the screen, Danielle's video message. She stood calmly in front of her hotel window, city lights glowing behind her. Her tone was controlled, yet every word carried weight. I didn't want to go public, she said. But when silence becomes protection for the guilty, speaking out becomes a duty. This isn't just about me. It's about every professional who's been talked over, looked down on, or dismissed because of what they look like. I forgive the person who wronged me, but I won't forgive the system that allows it. The video cut off. Silence filled the room. Linda whispered, she's not angry. She's articulate. This isn't a scandal anymore. It's a movement. By dawn, hashtags like #GroundedForRespect and #Danielle Carter Story trended worldwide. Major networks requested interviews. Even the airline's competitors began releasing diversity statements. And somewhere in that storm, Melissa's name leaked online. Her picture, her old posts, her entire digital life, dissected by strangers. Melissa's phone rang. It was her mother. Honey, what's going on? People are calling the house. Melissa's voice cracked. Mom, they think I'm a monster. Her mother paused. Did you treat that woman differently? Melissa hesitated. I didn't mean to. Her mother's reply was soft, but heavy. Meaning doesn't erase damage, sweetheart. Across the country, Danielle sat with her attorney, reviewing messages from the airline's legal team. They wanted a private settlement, hush money for silence. But Danielle refused. I don't want your check, she said. I want to meet your CEO. That single demand sent shockwaves through the airline boardroom. Within hours, arrangements were made for a private meeting, Danielle Carter, the airline CEO, and Melissa Thompson. The next morning, at a high-rise office overlooking downtown Atlanta, security escorted Danielle to a private conference room. Reporters waited outside, their cameras flashing like lightning. She entered the room calmly, wearing a charcoal suit, her demeanor collected, power without arrogance. Inside sat Charles Whitmore, the airline CEO, and across from him, a nervous, pale-faced Melissa. Whitmore stood, offering a polite smile. Ms. Carter, thank you for meeting with us. Danielle nodded. I didn't come for an apology. I came for accountability. Whitmore gestured toward Melissa. Ms. Thompson has expressed deep regret for her behavior. Danielle's eyes flicked toward her. Regret or fear? Melissa swallowed hard. Both. For the first time, she looked Danielle directly in the eye. I was wrong, she said quietly. I thought I was being professional. But I wasn't. I was dismissive. Danielle studied her face, the trembling hands, the cracked voice. There was remorse there, but also confusion. You don't get to decide how someone else experiences your actions, Danielle said softly. You just take responsibility. Whitmore leaned forward. Ms. Carter, we take this matter seriously. We're implementing mandatory bias training across all staff, starting immediately. Danielle nodded slowly. That's a start. Melissa looked down. What happens to me? Whitmore's voice was calm. You'll be placed on suspension pending review. Melissa blinked back tears. Please. I need this job. Danielle exhaled, conflicted. This wasn't the vengeance she wanted. She didn't want to ruin her, she wanted her to understand. Finally, Danielle stood. You'll keep your job if you use your voice to make sure this doesn't happen again. Melissa frowned. What do you mean? Danielle looked at her firmly. When this training begins, I want you to stand in front of every new attendant and tell them what you did and what it cost you. The room went quiet. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. That's unconventional. Danielle replied, so was being humiliated at 30,000 feet. Melissa's lips trembled. You really want me to relive that? Danielle nodded. Yes. Because someone else needs to see that even a mistake can teach something if you're brave enough to face it. For the first time, Melissa didn't argue. She nodded faintly. Whitmore stood. Then we'll proceed as agreed. Danielle gathered her things, turning toward the window, the skyline reflecting in the glass. Outside, helicopters hovered, reporters shouting her name. The world wanted her story, but she wanted closure. She took one last look at Melissa and said, You thought you were serving passengers. But you forgot we're all people, even when we don't look like you. Melissa closed her eyes. Tears streamed down. I'm sorry, she whispered again. Danielle turned to leave. Be better. As she stepped into the hallway, Linda Reyes from corporate approached her. Ms. Carter, she said quietly, there's something you need to know, something about Melissa? Danielle frowned. What is it? Linda looked uneasy. Her personnel file, it's not clean. There's a record. Danielle's tone hardened. What kind of record? Linda hesitated. A previous complaint. Almost identical. Same pattern. But it was buried by management. Danielle froze. You're saying this wasn't the first time? Linda nodded. No. It's the second. Danielle stared out at the skyline. For the first time since the incident, her calm began to crack. They protected her, she whispered. Linda nodded quietly. And that's the real story. And just like that, the truth began to unravel. The scandal wasn't just about a flight attendant's prejudice, it was about a company's silence. And Danielle was about to expose every secret they tried to bury. For most people, the story would have ended there. An apology, a suspension, a lesson learned. But for Danielle Carter, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because what Linda Reyes told her about the buried complaint didn't just expose one woman's prejudice. It hinted at something much bigger. 2 days later, Danielle sat in her hotel room surrounded by printed documents, news clips, and screenshots. Her mind wasn't on the fame or the interviews. It was on one question. How many times had this happened before and been silenced? Linda had quietly sent her copies of internal emails, unsigned but damning. Messages between supervisors and HR, dated from 2 years earlier. The subject line read, Service discrepancy, passenger complaint, Flight 276. The report described a nearly identical incident. Same flight attendant. Same pattern. Same excuse. But the outcome? Matter resolved internally. Passenger compensated. No further action. Danielle leaned back in disbelief. They knew, she whispered. The company knew, and did nothing. Meanwhile, at corporate headquarters, panic had set in. The viral story hadn't died down, it was spreading faster. Talk shows, blogs, radio, everyone was talking about the grounded flight. Linda Reyes, the only executive who'd shown Danielle respect, stood in the hallway as her colleagues argued behind glass doors. Do you realize what happens if she releases those emails? One VP shouted. She won't, another insisted. We settled this quietly. Didn't we? Linda's voice cut through the noise. You think silence equals safety. It doesn't. She has proof, and she's not the kind of woman who hides the truth. Back in her hotel, Danielle was on a video call with her attorney, Marcus Hall, a civil rights advocate from Chicago. He was calm, strategic, and furious. Danielle, he said, if what you're showing me is real, this isn't just discrimination. This is corporate negligence. They covered up repeated behavior. Danielle nodded. I'm not doing this for revenge. But people deserve to know. Marcus leaned closer to the camera. Then we'll make them know. We go public. Documents, timeline, everything. But once you do this, there's no going back. Danielle didn't blink. I've already gone too far to turn around. Later that night, she hit upload. A 10-minute video, calm, precise, devastating. They told me to move on. But how can I move on when silence protects the wrong people? This wasn't one bad moment. It was a pattern the airline ignored. Here's the proof. She showed the documents, emails, and timestamps. Names were blurred, but the truth was unmistakable. Within hours, the internet erupted again. News outlets called it the cover-up at 30,000 feet. The story dominated headlines. The airline's stock dropped. Boycotts started trending. Employees began reaching out anonymously, telling similar stories. Danielle's video wasn't just a confession. It was a spark that ignited something far larger than she imagined. At the same time, in her small apartment, Melissa watched the news with shaking hands. The guilt that had been simmering now turned to dread. She called her supervisor. Please tell me this isn't true, she pleaded. The voice on the other end hesitated. Melissa, there were other reports. Her chest tightened. You mean I wasn't the only one? No. But you were the one they finally couldn't protect. Melissa hung up, her breath shallow. For the first time, she realized she hadn't just lost her job. She'd become a symbol of everything wrong with the company she once believed in. Across town, Danielle's phone rang again. It was Linda. Her voice was trembling. Danielle, you need to know what's happening inside. What do you mean? They're trying to shift the blame. They're saying you doctored the emails. Danielle froze. They what? They're scrambling, trying to protect the board. The CEO is furious you went public. Danielle exhaled slowly. Then I'll meet them head-on. Don't, Linda warned. They're planning a press conference. They'll twist it. But Danielle was already reaching for her blazer. I won't let them rewrite the story I lived. That afternoon, at the airline's headquarters, the company held a press briefing. Reporters filled the room. Cameras pointed toward the podium. CEO Charles Whitmore stepped up to the microphone. His tone was polished, controlled. We regret the unfortunate incident involving our employee and Ms. Carter. However, recent claims suggesting systemic cover-ups are unverified. The crowd murmured. Then, a commotion near the back. The side doors opened. Danielle Carter walked in. Gasps rippled through the room. The CEO's face turned white. She strode calmly to the front, flanked by Marcus and Linda. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing wildly. Whitmore stammered. Ms. Carter, this isn't an open. But she was already at the mic. Her voice was steady, powerful. You said the claims were unverified, she said. She reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email. Let me help you verify them. She handed it to a reporter. The flashbulbs lit up the room like lightning. The reporter read it aloud. Do not escalate complaint. Handle internally. Compensate and close file. Signed by a senior HR executive. Gasps filled the hall. Whitmore's jaw tightened. That's confidential internal material. Danielle interrupted. No. That's evidence of a pattern. A pattern of protection. Reporters shouted over one another. Ms. Carter, are you accusing the airline of discrimination cover-ups? Danielle looked straight at the cameras. I'm not accusing. I'm proving. The room exploded. Flashes, shouting, chaos. The CEO tried to regain control. This meeting is over. But Danielle wasn't done. She turned toward the front row, where Melissa sat, pale, head down. "Melissa," she said firmly. The room went silent again. Melissa looked up, her eyes red. Danielle continued. "You weren't the first. You were just the one they couldn't hide." Whitmore slammed his hand on the podium. "Enough." Danielle's tone didn't waver. "You can silence me, but not the truth. The world's watching, and this time, you don't get to close the file." Security began to move forward, but Linda stepped between them. "Let her speak," she demanded. The CEO hesitated, torn between authority and panic. And that's when another voice spoke up, trembling but clear. "Melissa." She stood slowly. "Everything she's saying is true." "Guess." The CEO froze. Reporters erupted again. Melissa's voice cracked. "I was told to stay quiet after my first complaint. They said it would damage the company's image." Danielle turned toward her, shocked, but listening. Melissa wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, Danielle. But they trained us to look away from problems, not fix them." Whitmore's composure broke. "Stop talking," he shouted. But the microphones were already live. The truth was out. Danielle stepped closer to the podium. "You wanted exposure?" she said quietly. "Now the world has it." The next morning, the airline's headquarters was surrounded by reporters. Government officials called for investigations. And behind closed doors, the CEO's job was hanging by a thread. But Danielle wasn't celebrating. Because the storm she unleashed was only just beginning. The world didn't sleep that night. Within hours of Danielle's video going live, showing the flight attendants' blatant racism, the captain's silence, and the airline's attempted cover-up, it spread across every major platform like wildfire. #racism in the skies. #justice for Danielle. #grounded for truth. Those were the hashtags burning through Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and news headlines. Everyone had something to say. But the loudest voice of all was the truth. And now, the truth had consequences. By morning, the airline's headquarters in Atlanta was under siege, not by protesters, but by reporters, flashing cameras, and furious employees demanding answers. The company's CEO, Gregory Henson, a man known for his charm on television but iron control behind closed doors, stared at the chaos from his corner office. "Get me PR on the line. Now." But there was a problem. The PR team was already on another call with the board of directors. And guess who the board wanted to talk about? Danielle. Across the city, Danielle woke up to thousands of notifications. Her inbox was flooded, journalists, activists, lawyers, even politicians. Everyone wanted to talk. Everyone wanted a piece of her story. Her phone vibrated again, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Danielle Collins?" "Yes. This is Lillian Porter, NBC News. We'd like to feature your story on national television. Tonight." Her breath caught. For years, she'd built her company from the ground up, fighting through boardrooms filled with people who underestimated her. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was justice. She agreed. Meanwhile, inside the airline, panic had turned into blame. Melissa, the flight attendant who refused to serve Danielle, had been placed on temporary suspension pending investigation. But even that wasn't enough. The public demanded her termination. The employees demanded reform. And when a leaked email surfaced, showing senior management instructing staff to downplay the incident and avoid racial language, the fire turned into an explosion. That same day, the FAA opened a federal inquiry. Civil rights lawyers from D.C. joined in. The airline's stock plummeted 11% in a single afternoon. And the captain, the man who stayed silent during the confrontation, resigned quietly before the end of the week. But the storm didn't stop there. Danielle's company, Collins Innovations, started receiving threats. Anonymous messages. Phone calls warning her to stop talking before it gets worse. Her assistant tried to delete them, but one voicemail stood out. "You think you can destroy an airline? You have no idea who you're up against." Danielle didn't flinch. She'd heard worse before, from boardrooms, investors, even partners. But this was war. At NBC headquarters, The studio lights glowed. Danielle sat across from the host, her posture calm, her eyes firm. The host leaned in. Danielle, millions have seen the footage. But tell us, what happened after the cameras stopped rolling? Danielle inhaled deeply. What happened was silence. The kind that tells you everything you need to know about power, race, and fear. But silence ends when someone decides to speak. The room fell silent. That clip, that single quote, would be replayed across every news network for weeks. Back at the airline, chaos deepened. Gregory Henson called an emergency press conference. Skylux Airways does not tolerate discrimination in any form, he said confidently. We are conducting a full internal investigation. But as he spoke, a reporter shouted, Mr. Henson, is it true there were previous complaints against the same flight attendant and that your office ignored them? Gregory froze. The cameras zoomed in. That was the first moment the world saw fear in his eyes. Later that evening, Danielle received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. Subject: You need to see this. Attached was a file, dozens of internal memos, photos, and reports, all documenting years of ignored racial discrimination complaints at Skylux Airways. Some from passengers, some from employees, some from pilots. Her hands shook. The truth was deeper and darker than she thought. Her attorney, Malik Rogers, met her that night. Danielle, if this leaks, it won't just destroy the airline. It'll expose an entire network of corporate protection. Danielle's voice was steady. Then it's time people know what's been flying under the radar. Malik hesitated. You'll have enemies. High ones. I already do, she replied. The next morning, CNN broke the story. Exclusive, internal memos reveal systemic racism at Skylux Airways. The world erupted again. The Department of Justice announced an official investigation. Protesters flooded major airports demanding justice for passengers and employees alike. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside a shadowy boardroom, Gregory Henson met with two other executives. This woman's a problem, one muttered. Gregory's jaw tightened. Then we'll handle her. He turned toward the window, watching the sunset fade behind the skyline. She thinks she exposed us, but she has no idea what she started. That night, Danielle returned home to find her apartment door slightly open. Her heart pounded. She stepped inside. Everything looked untouched, except one thing. On her coffee table, a single envelope. Inside it, a photo. A picture of her boarding the same flight weeks ago. No words. No note. Just the image, and the chilling realization that someone had been watching her long before the incident. As thunder rolled outside, Danielle whispered to herself, this isn't just about one flight anymore. This is about everything they've been hiding. She didn't know who sent the files. She didn't know who was watching her. But one thing was certain, the storm had only just begun. Because when truth takes flight, the ones who built their empire on lies will do anything to bring it down. The city was quiet that morning, too quiet for what was about to come. Danielle sat in the back of a black sedan, staring at the skyline. News drones hovered over the Skylux headquarters, capturing crowds of protesters and banners reading, "Justice at 30,000 feet. Accountability in the air." The world had finally seen what Skylux really was, but the story wasn't over. Because deep inside that building, one final secret still waited to be exposed. Danielle wasn't coming to talk. She was coming to finish this. Her attorney, Malik Rogers, was beside her. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried the weight of everything they'd uncovered. "You're sure about this?" he asked quietly. Danielle nodded. "They silenced too many people. Today that ends." Inside the boardroom, the executives waited, Gregory Henson among them. His usually composed demeanor was gone, replaced with unease. The room's tension was heavy enough to cut through. When Danielle entered, everyone turned. The air froze. Gregory forced a smile. "Ms. Collins, I didn't expect you to come in person." Danielle set a file on the table. "Oh, I think you did." The board's lead attorney cleared his throat. "Ms. Collins, before we proceed, you should know." She cut him off. "No. You should know that the entire world is watching this meeting." The room went still. Danielle opened her phone and turned the screen toward them. A live stream. Hundreds of thousands of viewers were already tuned in. Gregory's eyes widened. "You can't." "I can," she said firmly. "And I am." She pulled out documents, copies of every leaked memo, every silenced complaint, and every ignored report. These came from inside your walls. You knew your employees were being harassed. You knew passengers were being profiled. And you buried it. Gregory leaned forward, trying to control his tone. "You have no proof those came from." But before he could finish, Danielle dropped another bomb. "Oh, I do. And it came from someone sitting in this room." A murmur rippled through the table. Gregory froze. His hand twitched slightly. Danielle turned her gaze to the vice president seated to his right, Martha Kent, the company's operations head. "Martha?" Gregory said, disbelief in his voice. Martha sighed. "I told you this would happen, Greg. I told you the lies would come out." She turned to Danielle. "You weren't the first, Miss Collins. We've had hundreds of cases like yours buried under customer misconduct reports." It was protocol, his protocol. Danielle's eyes narrowed. "So it was true." Martha nodded. "Every word." The room erupted. Board members whispered, cameras clicked, phones buzzed. Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're destroying an entire airline." Danielle stood. "No. You destroyed it the moment you decided some people were worth less than others." Outside, the crowd could hear shouting from inside the building. Journalists swarmed the entrance as security tightened. Danielle reached for one last document in her folder, a letter signed by the Department of Transportation confirming Skylux Airways was under federal suspension pending criminal investigation. Gregory's face went pale. "It's over," she said quietly. "You grounded me once. Now I've grounded you, permanently." But before she could leave, Gregory snapped. "You think you've won? You think exposing me changes anything? You'll be old news in a week." Danielle turned slowly, her voice calm but sharp. "Maybe. But for 1 week, the world will remember that truth still has wings." Then she walked out, cameras flashing, people cheering, security trying to control the crowd. Hours later, Gregory Henson was arrested for corporate obstruction and racial discrimination cover-ups. Melissa, the flight attendant who started it all, issued a public apology, but it was too late. Her name had become the face of systemic racism in the skies. The airline's license was revoked within a month. Martha Kent resigned and began working with civil rights organizations to reform flight training programs across the country. And Danielle? She didn't just win a case. She started a movement. A few weeks later, Danielle stood on a stage at a press event in New York City. Cameras flashed as she looked out at the audience, survivors of discrimination, whistleblowers, supporters, and her own team. She took a deep breath and said, "When they tried to silence me, I realized something powerful. Silence is the soil where injustice grows. But once you speak, once you shine a light, that darkness can't survive." The audience stood. Applause echoed. Tears fell. And somewhere deep inside, Danielle knew, she hadn't just grounded a plane, she'd grounded a culture of silence. Later that night, she sat alone in her office, watching the city lights below. Malik entered quietly. "It's done," he said. "Justice served." Danielle smiled faintly. "No, justice begun." Her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, "We need to talk. You exposed Skylux, but they weren't the only ones." Danielle stared at the screen, her expression shifting from peace to concern. The story wasn't over. She looked out the window once more as the wind howled softly against the glass. "Let them come," she whispered, "because this time, I'll be ready." The skies were clear again, but somewhere in those clouds, another secret was waiting to land. If you believe no one should ever be judged by the color of their skin, but by the strength of their character, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Danielle's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story will take you even deeper into the fight for truth and equality.